Brandon Hyde's most reliable reliever down in that Oriole bullpen over the past 2 years has no doubt been Yennier Cano, but he started to show a few cracks in 2024. How can the Orioles avoid him breaking down with all this usage next season? We'll talk about that coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Tuesday, December 17th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we continue our Orioles player review series from the 2024 seasons as we break down the campaign for Yennier Cano. He had another great year. Wasn't as good as his rookie year with the O's, but was still pretty great. But there was a little bit of a forearm issue, and there was some command issues that cropped up a little bit, and you're just starting to see some question marks with Cano. Well, we'll break it all down with what went right with his season, what went wrong, and his biggest storyline heading into 2025. That's coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. So we continue with our player review series, kind of getting well into the back half of not every, but almost every player who's currently on the 40-man roster and played for the team in 2024. And I've been doing a lot of them throughout the offseason, so make sure to check them out. You can like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. We got a lot of the episodes there. You can check them out wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, wherever it may be. If you leave a 5-star rating and a review there as well, it really helps out the show. We got all of those player review episodes there as well. And today we go into the bullpen, and we're going to talk about Yennier Cano. And we're going to start with, on Cano, what went right for what was another really good season for Yennier Cano. Like, I don't think anyone is arguing that he was better this year than he was in 2023 when he made the All-Star team. Like, that 2023 season might end up being the best season he ever has. And it's really hard to top what he did last year, but he was still, despite not being an All-Star, really good this year. His final stats, he appeared in 70 games for the Orioles. That led the team, and through 60 innings out of the bullpen, posted a 3.15 ERA with a 3.55 FIP for Cano, a ground ball rate, which he upped from last year up to 63%, to go along with a 26.1% strikeout rate and a 9.6% walk rate. Opponents hit 241 against the now 30-year-old right-hander who will be 31 in March. So let's start with what went right for Yennier Cano, and that is he really did continue to be the Orioles' most trusted reliever, and specifically their most trusted setup man, because he got, a couple of opportunities here and there as the Orioles were figuring out the closer spot this year, even more than last year when, of course, they really had Felix Bautista in that role before his injury in August. But it became, I think, clearer in 2024 that his best role is the 7th and 8th inning, and he was Hyde's number one option in that spot. Second straight year in which he led the Orioles in appearances. And besides September when he trailed off a little bit, I mean, he was consistently good month to month. It wasn't a big roller coaster season. He was a good reliever. You look at his stats in every single month, but September, when again, he fell off a little bit, and we will get to that in a moment. But once again, Cano was really, really good against right-handers, and he had a little bit of struggles even last year against lefties, but was so dominant against righties. The dominance against righties continued this year. A 32% strikeout rate against righties this year versus 26% last year. I mean, Cano is not generally known as a strikeout pitcher. I mean, he was above average in terms of his K rate, but 32%, that's more like what an elite reliever is able to sometimes post. Like, that's really, really good K numbers. Righties hit just 219 with a 278 WOBA against him. And it was the sinker-slider combination once again, with honestly even more emphasis on the slider this year, that really made Cano good against the right-handers. Like, he threw his slider in 2025, but it was clearly, or 2023, but it was clearly his number 3 pitch, right behind the sinker and the changeup. And the slider also wasn't that great last year. In 2023, right-handers hit 296 and whiffed 35% of the time against his slider. Righties this year could not figure that pitch out. Right-handers in 2024 hit just 182 with a 51% swing and miss rate against Canó's slider. Those are some elite numbers for one pitch. And it was different. It used to be kind of a little bit of a cutter, basically, but he added horizontal movement to his slider and got a lot more whiffs and became a much better pitch. And it's nasty from, a little bit more of a sidearm delivery that Canó has. It gives different movement to that pitch. And again, I mentioned an elite ground ball rate. I mean, it's not just the 63% overall ground ball rate. It's 68% against right-handers. I mean, a lot of strikeouts and a lot of ground balls leads to a lot of success against righties for Canó this year. And you add to the fact that just like the stuff is still nasty. And that is what allows him to pitch in this many games, get this many guys out, and especially be that good against righties. Like, even if some of it is not performing as well, I mean, you still have his number one pitch, a sinker he throws more than half the time. It's 96 miles an hour. He can run it up to 98. Guys beat the ball into the ground. An average launch angle of -8 degrees batted balls against Canó's sinker this year, which means basically every time somebody hits it, it's generally going to be a ground ball. And that is what he is able to do. And that's why his ground ball rate is so high. You have that good slider I mentioned that got a lot better this year, which probably his biggest step forward he took was improving that slider in 2024. And then you also added, it's still a nasty changeup. Like, the swing and miss rates this year, they went a little bit down, went from about 41% to 32%, but it was still a good pitch. Opponents still hit just 230 against it. It was more of his pitch of choice to try and get lefties out. And it's still a 90 to 91 mile per hour changeup with good arm side run and movement. And then I think the also thing that was interesting, I think still the biggest step forward was improving that slider and making it from, just an offering to change things up last year to maybe his second best pitch behind his sinker this year. You could argue it was his best pitch at times this year. The other addition that was intriguing to his stuff was really adding the four-seam fastball. I mean, it was in his repertoire in 2023. He threw 34 four-seam fastballs. That was 3% of his offering. So it was basically something that he added at the end of last season when guys were starting to pick up his sinker, his changeup a little bit. He felt like he needed a different wrinkle in a fastball. So every so often, in August and September last year, he would throw in that four-seamer just to get a different look. But this year, it was still his fourth most used pitch. He still threw the sinker, changeup, slider more often, but the usage went from 3% to 11% on that four-seam fastball. And once you get a pitch up above 10%, that feels like a legitimate part of your arsenal. And up at 11% shows me like, hey, he was looking to use this pitch. And he did use it more so against lefties than he did against righties. It's kind of a thing where he's figured out his sinker is a little worse against lefties, but the four-seamer plays better. But he also threw it more against righties this year than he did last year. It turned into a bigger weapon for him. And here was the interesting thing, like, guys hit just 125 against his four-seamer. And in a year when they hit his sinker a little bit better, and we'll get to that, to have a fastball you can throw that, like, the velocity was better. Like, his sinker averaged 96, his four-seamer averaged 97 this year. So he's still getting good velocity. Guys aren't squaring it up. He's 31% whiff rate. He's getting swings and misses. The slugging was also 125. He gave up 2 hits all year against that four-seamer, and they were both singles. Like, guys could not get to that pitch. Now, again, he's throwing it 11% of the time. He's a reliever. He threw only 111 total four-seamers. So this is not some giant sample size on this pitch, but it worked and worked and worked when he would toss it in there. And, he's got that arm angle where that thing can work. And so you start to think, like, what can he do with that four-seamer moving forward? And that's a question we'll probably answer at the end of this episode. But it wasn't all great for Canó. I mean, his ERA went up by over 1 full run from last year to this year, and his walks went way up as well. So let's talk about what went wrong for Yennier Cano. That is coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is focused on togetherness this holiday season. That means when you bring people together at live events, the experience is that much better, and it's the perfect gift. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Now, it's going to be a while before there's baseball tickets out there. Basketball, football, hockey, though, go to Game Time. You're going to get great deals. You're going to get great seats. Maybe it's not sports season for you anymore. Baseball is your sport. Maybe you want to see other things. Well, with those Game Time picks, the curation makes it easier to save more on not just sports, but also concerts, comedy, theater, and more. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB. That is LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. So we talked about what went right for Yennier Cano this season. Now let's talk about what went wrong. And this is all subjective. Like, he still had a good relief season, but there was a lot more things that went wrong this year than they did in his first year in 2023, when, if you remember, he threw 72 and 2/3 innings and posted a 2.11 ERA for the Orioles. Like, he at times held that bullpen together. He was fantastic in his first season in 2023. He was still good this year, still threw in a team high 70 games. He was still probably Brandon Hyde's most trusted reliever. I don't think he maybe ever left the trust category in my bullpen trust rankings all season, but he had more flaws. He certainly had more flaws. And I think the first thing that went wrong was he started to wear down and get tired a little bit at the end of this season again. And it kind of low-key happened in 2023. Cano posted a 5.79 ERA in the month of September in 2023. That was by far his worst month. Got even worse this year, a 6.43 ERA in September this year. Again, by far his worst month. Now, his stuff numbers, which were actually better this year than they were last year, were still good. His velocity was still normal in September. But this happening 2 years in a row is definitely a little bit of a concerning sign that he's broken down back-to-back years. Now, the Orioles did a better job of resting him in 2024. I mentioned Cano threw 72 appearances for 72 and 2/3 innings in 2023. He threw 70 appearances this year, so basically the same amount of games, but only 60 innings. So they cut him down by almost 13 innings, and they made a lot of his appearances shorter. Really, what the thing was, they did less multi-inning appearances for Yennier Cano. He made, in 2023, 15 appearances of more than 1 inning. Only threw 9 games of more than 1 inning this year. So they knocked that number down a little bit. Also, they gave him more rest. He pitched 19 times on 0 days rest. So basically on a back-to-back in 2023. The Orioles only had him do that 15 times in 2024. They're still relying on him a great deal, but they pulled back his usage a little bit in both of those situations, which I think will certainly help him long-term. But maybe in 2025, they have to do even more of that pulling back on potentially his usage. And we'll get to that. But I think the other worrisome thing is that this time there was a bit of an injury involved. It didn't really seem like there was a clear injury involved with him, just burning out a little bit at the end of 2023. It just seemed to be like, hey, this is his first big league season. Things happen to relievers being used this much. But there were some injury questions this year. Now, he never spent time on the injury list this year, which is good, but he was dealing with some forearm tightness in September. Basically didn't pitch for a week from September 12th to the 18th. And when he returned, the Orioles called forearm tightness. But when he came back, him and the Orioles said he was feeling good and he was moving past it. But when he came back after the tightness and missing a week, he allowed 4 earned runs in 5 innings pitched to finish off the season. And the stuff plus rating on his sinker was way, way down. It was just not the same pitch. So that is a little concerning. Now, he did throw in the postseason and looked okay, but there's definite questions when he came back from those forearm issues. And again, I'm not saying it always does, but forearm a lot of times leads to more pressing injuries like the elbow. Now, I mentioned the sinker being down with the metrics and the stuff. That was kind of the case all season. Now, the biggest flare-up of it was after he came back from the forearm stuff late in September. But in terms of stuff plus, the sinker was actually better this year, like pure stuff plus. That just means how nasty is this pitch. It doesn't take into account when you're throwing it, where you're throwing it. Is it a strike? Is it a ball? Just takes into account basically velocity and movement and how nasty it is. It was actually better on the sinker all year until he had the injury in September. And the velocity was the same this year as it was last year. But StatCast has a run value statistic for every pitch you throw. Basically, puts together not only how much it moves and how hard you throw it, but also, is it a strike? Is it a quality strike? Are you throwing it on the corners? You're getting good results, all that good stuff. His StatCast run value was plus 17 on his sinker in 2023. That made it the third best sinker in all of Major League Baseball. That tracks. That's how good Canó was. That's how good that pitch was last year. This year, he was only at plus 2. So it was still an above average sinker, but that is way down. He was tied for the 100th best sinker in Major League Baseball. A lot of pitchers throw sinkers. That's why there's so many sinkers out there. That is a very, very different pitch to have I got an above average sinker versus I have an elite sinker. So adding more of those four-seamers, I mentioned the usage going from 3 to 11%, was some to just change up the look, change up the mix, him liking his four-seamer, but some was because the sinker just wasn't nearly as good this year, and he felt like he had to throw a different pitch out there. But here's the thing. You're thinking, Connor, how can his stuff plus go up and his run value goes so far down with the velocity? And even if you look at the movement profile, it was fairly similar on the sinker from year to year. The issue was the command. It wasn't as much the stuff. It was the command. And that was the thing with Canó. When the Orioles got him from the Twins in the Jorge Lopez trade at the deadline in 2022, he was known as a guy with this great stuff who had no idea where the ball was going. And we saw him throw in a couple games in the big leagues down the stretch in 2022, and he looked just like that. He had no idea where the baseball was going. But when he came up in May of 2023, suddenly he could throw strikes and he wasn't walking anybody. And that was a big part of his game last year. A big part of that 2.11 ERA was the fact that Canó went out there and had just a 4.6% walk rate, almost half the league average in 2023. He was elite. That jumped all the way up to a 9.6% walk rate. So his strikeout rate increased by 3%, which is great. His ground ball rate increased as well. But you can't have a walk rate increase by 5%. Now, 9.6% is higher than average. It's not terrible. But when you make that big of a jump year to year, that calls him some questions about command and potentially an injury, because arm injuries can certainly lead to some of those command issues. And the command, honestly, it was terrible in the first half for Canó. He got better down the stretch until he had the forearm issues in September. So that's a good sign that it wasn't like getting worse as he was getting tired. He was clearly working on it. He was working on his arm angle, which was a little bit different this year, and it got better. But this is one of the reasons why his sinker didn't play well, because he couldn't pinpoint his sinker on the corners like he could all of last year. Like, he would just lose sinkers. A lot of times glove side, he would like pull a sinker to a righty. He'd try to throw it for the outside corner and he would just yank it outside, and it wouldn't have enough sink to kind of dart back to the outside corner and be an easy take for a ball for a lot of right-handed hitters. And the other issue was his sinker got much worse against lefties. Lefties hit 286 and slugged 414 against his sinker this year. Like, his changeup was okay against lefties, but he was just not good against left-handers. I should say the lefties hit 286 overall. They hit 333 with a 571 slugging against his sinker alone. And remember, this sinker is a ground ball pitch. It's not a swing and miss pitch. But overall, he got people to swing and miss 21% of the time, right? That's not terrible against his sinker. But that was all righties. Lefties swung and missed at his sinker just 3% of the time this year. Think about it. For every 100 times a lefty swung at Canó's sinker, they swung and missed only 3 times. That is not going to spell good things for any pitcher, and especially not a late inning relief pitcher when you are looking more and more to miss bats out of that bullpen. So the four-seamer did become a weapon. He found that it was much better against lefties, so he started throwing it more against lefties, because he kind of needed a second pitch beyond that changeup against left-handers, because his slider's bad against lefties, and then his sinker turned into a bad pitch against lefties as well. So that's the big reason why he threw a lot more four-seamers this year. But the four-seamer is still not his bread and butter. His bread and butter is that sinker, and kind of his slider. He made it better this year. So can he find a way to get lefties out? And that is really one of the big questions leading into 2025. And that's what we're going to get to finish off the show. Where do the Orioles go from here with Yennier Cano? Wasn't as good, was still good, but maybe some injury and usage concerns coming up as he turns 31. We'll talk about that next to finish off the show. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Now, you can get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets just if you win. Pretty good deal to me. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by SelectQuote. The World Series, the Super Bowl, the Olympics, the world's top athletes get to play in these top-level sporting events thanks to one thing: teamwork. And teamwork can also protect your financial legacy and your family's future. SelectQuote's licensed insurance agents are the perfect teammates when shopping for customized, affordable life insurance. They can find you the right policy to keep your financial legacy safely in your family's end zone. And in sports, winning is everything. That's why you always need a good strategy to keep you moving towards the goalposts. Winning strategies for life are just as important. That's why this team gets life insurance through SelectQuote. Now, if you're in good health, they work with carriers that can get you same-day coverage for up to $5 million. No medical exam is required. They shop and you save at SelectQuote. So get the right life insurance for you for less at SelectQuote.com/lockedon. Again, go to SelectQuote.com/lockedon to get started today. One more time, that is SelectQuote.com/lockedon. So to finish things off on this Yennier Cano 2024 season review episode, let's talk about what is next for Canó. His biggest storylines heading into the offseason and then heading into 2025. And I think the first question is he healthy? All right, he had the forearm issue that kept him out for a week in September. He was not very good. The stuff wasn't good. The command wasn't good. The numbers were not good when he came back for those final 5 innings he pitched in September after the injury that didn't put him on the injury list, but again, did leave him out for a week. And he's pitched a lot over the past 2 seasons, 142 relief appearances over the last 2 years. That is 6th most among all relievers in Major League Baseball from 2023 to 2024. He is throwing a lot and more than most relief pitchers. Now, on one hand, that's a good thing because you're saying pitchers get injured a lot. If you're staying that healthy for 2 years, that probably fares well. On the other side, it's like, it feels like every pitch a major leaguer throws gets them closer and closer to some sort of arm injury. And except for this little thing in September, he's pretty much avoided that for the last 2 years. But here's what scares me. Generally, and this is not always, this is not 100%, it's not even close to that. But a lot of Tommy John surgeries and elbow injuries start with forearm issues. You feel it in the forearm, then it goes to the elbow soreness, then it becomes Tommy John. And again, I'm not saying that is what's going to happen to Yennier Cano. I have no inside info except for that his forearm was barking at him late last September and he wasn't good when he came back from it. But when it's the forearm or the elbow, and sometimes the forearm leads to the elbow, it concerns you a lot when he's going to be 31 years old and he has pitched as much as he has over the past 2 seasons. And even if he is healthy, even if he gets to spring training and says, yep, the elbow's good, I'm ready to go again and be a big part of this bullpen in 2025, the question is then, okay, we got him to spring training. You know, we're hoping he's not part of that dreaded press conference Mike Elias does on the first day of spring training when he basically announces all the injuries from the offseason that we didn't know about. That's when we learned the big one about Kyle Bradish last February. But then the follow-up question becomes, okay, can they keep him healthy? Because even if he's good for opening day, will the Orioles eventually need another plan? Like, can they keep him from throwing as many back-to-backs? They reduced his back-to-backs. They reduced his more than 1 inning outings in 2024. Will they have to do that again? Will they have to cut him from 70 innings to 60 innings to closer to 50 innings this year to make sure to keep him healthy? And would they have the other relievers to shoulder the load? Like Felix Bautista is going to be back from his Tommy John surgery, but we already know that the Orioles are going to push him along lightly early in the season. He's not going to do a lot of back-to-backs. He's not going to get every save opportunity to get him kind of ready to push forward in the second half and make sure he's healthy. Danny Coulombe and Jacob Webb are both gone. Now, Webb is already signed with the Rangers. Coulombe is technically still a free agent, but it would seem like the Orioles, after declining his $4 million team option, are not going to bring him back. And those are 2 of your more reliable relievers over the past 2 years. as well. And I do think the Orioles are going to add one relief pitcher before this offseason is over. And I think because of maybe some questions surrounding how much Canó could potentially give you, I think that's even more of a reason to add a legitimate reliever who you sign to a major league contract and will definitely be in your bullpen on opening day and can eat up 50 to 60 innings next year and be a solid veteran middle relief guy. I think that would be important. But the other two guys who are going to be huge here are Seranthony Dominguez and Gregory Soto. Both of them brought over at the trade deadline last year from the Phillies. Both were really, really important to this Oriole bullpen down the stretch. Like, they were probably the Orioles' best two relievers in September, Dominguez and Soto. Like, they were great. But the question is, can at the very least they fill in the jobs that Webb and Coulomb were doing the last couple of years? And you would like to think, because the stuff they have, which is much better than what Webb and Coulomb have, they could be a step better than those two if they stay healthy. If they're able to do that, that takes a lot of the setup pressure off of Canó, because if Soto and Dominguez are as good as they can be, you have two really good setup men that are just as good as Canó could be. You add those three plus Felix Bautista back in the ninth inning, you're feeling really good about your bullpen. But if Dominguez starts to have the struggles he had in Philly, or Soto looks more like the guy the O's saw in the first couple of weeks after they traded for him and has command issues, then you've got some problems. Then you've got, younger guys you're looking to rely on. Then you're giving more big innings to Cionel Perez. You're relying more on Colin Selby or Cade Stroud, or maybe you're putting Albert Suarez in the bullpen, or you're waiting for Tyler Wells to come back healthy, or you're giving big time lockdown late innings to Keegan Aiken, despite him having a really good season last year. Is he ready for that? Like, those are questions that the Orioles have to answer if Canó cannot be that lockdown go-to guy every single day. And I'm just not sure he's going to be. Not that he's going to be bad. I just worry about the health, worry about him being run down, that it's hard for him to be. He was one of the best, if not the best reliever in baseball in 2023. You can't repeat that. He was still really good last year, but I think he's going to be closer to last year moving forward, which is just reliable, but not as reliable as the year before. Now, he does have options left, so if the O's really needed to give him a breather at any point in the season, they could freely send him to AAA for a couple of weeks just to get him a little more rested, but you can only do that so many times. And so the question kind of is for Canó, if you're keeping him healthy, he stays healthy, you keep him healthy, you have a good plan for him, you have other relievers pitching well. I guess the last question is, can the sinker rebound? We talked about how elite it was in 2023 and how it was just a little bit above average last year, and lefties destroyed it. If he's going to be a lockdown setup man, you can't just be elite against righties. You got to be able to get lefties out, and he did not do a great job of that last season. And it's all about the sinker. That's his bread and butter pitch, throws it over half the time. Lefties crushed it, therefore lefties crushed him overall. If he can find a way to either incorporate more four-seamers up in the zone that were good against lefties, or tweak the sinker a little bit to get it back to at least the levels it was in 2023, where, it wasn't his best pitch against left-handers, but it was still a good offering, we can see closer to that good and healthy Yennier Cano we saw in his first full years in the big leagues when he made that all-star team with the Orioles. I just really do hope that first and foremost, he can stay healthy and stay in this bullpen, because we know how much Brandon Hyde trusts him out there. They've got Canó for a while. He's not a free agent until after the 2028 season. They've got 4 more years of Yennier Cano before they even have to think about that. So hopefully that doesn't involve injury. And, reliever is volatile. You never know. He could just have a bad season next year. It happens to so many good relievers, but the hope is that he can tweak these little things. He's got the better slider. He's got that new four-seamer. Just get that command back. You don't have to go back to a 5% walk rate, but you can't be pushing 10%. Maybe meet yourself somewhere in the middle, and he can be a really, really dominant reliever once again in 2025. But let me know in the comments section here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. They've got Felix back, they've got Dominguez, they've got Soto, they've got some other guys. What do you think Cano's role will be if he's healthy in the Oriole bullpen in 2025? Want to hear your thoughts about that one. But that'll do it for this episode. We'll be back for one more episode this week. As a reminder, this week starts the stretch of we are down to 3 episodes per week until basically we get to February and get back to spring training. Most weeks it'll be a Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule. This week a little off with the Sunday episode, the Tuesday episode. We're looking at Thursday or Friday. We'll be back with you this week to get you caught up on all the Orioles news and notes as they continue their search for starting pitching this offseason. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.